Hello and welcome to Buy Africa, the show where we focus on investment opportunities around the continent. I'm Tshepo Modiba and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Fungai Tarirah, Portfolio Manager at Rudiarius Capital Management, and we look at the Namibian market. Fungai, Namibian economy, what are the general dynamics? I know very closely linked to the South African economy.
True enough. It's about a $14 billion economy,
right,
growing at about 4%.
So in the scale of the world, fairly small.
In the scale of the world, yes, fairly small, but I think given where they're coming from,
sure,
we've seen some pretty reasonable strides in terms of growing that number.
Right.
Most recently been noted to be growing at around 4.2% per annum,
which is not a
which is a good clip,
yeah,
you know.
it's better than South Africa.
Definitely, and sort of sits near the sub-Saharan average.
Sure.
Simple average of many of the economies, and that number is likely to recover to maybe 5.5%.
And what's driving that economic growth?
It's a very broad-based economy, so you get some fairly good contribution from manufacturing, from mining, from services as well. So mining is about 12%. Agriculture, which is I think a very good thing given the fact that it's largely a desert.
Right.
Is also quite significant for them. Roughly 10% of GDP comes from agriculture, although 40% of that would probably be fishing.
Right.
Then the rest is, you know, mainstream agriculture. So nice, diverse drivers of economic growth there. And they've also got a booming property sector, which has had the notoriety of being one of the fastest growing price markets in the world over the last couple of years.
Well, so it sounds like Namibia has a good story to tell.
Yeah, I think so, yes.
So the nature of that diversified economy means not necessarily likely to be impacted by big shocks in terms of commodity markets or anything of that like.
Agreed, but at the same time they do import a certain amount, and a fair amount of their exports is actually mineral related.
Right.
They export a lot of diamonds, uranium is in there as well, and a couple of other minerals. So the shock effect from commodities would come in that respect.
Right.
They earn less for their exports as in when the commodity prices actually come down. But government has been trying to diversify the sources of government revenue and the sources of exports, right, or the products that they actually sell to the rest of the world. So we're seeing some improvement coming through there.
Okay, let's hone in on the stock market. I think you were saying nine counters listed.
Yeah, so you've got 19 dual listings from South Africa, but right, specifically Namibian businesses. Yes, you've got 9 different counters. Total market cap is in the region of about $2.3 billion in that kind of region, which kind of puts it at about half the size of Botswana,
right,
to just sort of get some perspective.
Even though the population's actually slightly bigger.
Yes, actually.
Okay.
And you've got a fair mix of companies that are listed on there, as well as I think a couple of conglomerates which sort of cover many parts of the economy. But financial services tend to dominate,
right,
as is the case
throughout the continent.
Across the continent, yeah. The continental average is about 34% of market cap is in banks, insurance, and financial. So that's pretty much the same in Namibia.
To put that number in perspective, I think the global number is closer to 20%.
Right. Right.
So we do have a little bit of a skew on the continent. Any interesting ideas? Any interesting companies that are listed in Namibia?
I think FNB is a standout performer.
Right.
It's the market leader as far
FNB
as
Namibia.
FNB Namibia, yes.
Right.
So they've listed the local business separate to what is taking place in South Africa.
Right.
That business is actually quite good. It's a market leader as far as mortgage lending is concerned. But I think the biggest attraction to the business is their knack for innovation. So right, borrowing from the parent in South Africa, they've been able to introduce quite a number of innovations into the market that have helped them keep their costs down, and that ultimately over time has driven margins, right, which has reflected quite well in their returns on equity.
Right.
Not to be outdone, the competition is also coming through. I think Standard Bank has recently launched an e-wallet sort of product to try and push their technological offerings to, or technology-based offerings to their clients. So the competition is definitely on there. But I think FNB is definitely, of the listed businesses, FNB is definitely a class act. We also like Namibian Breweries,
right,
which is the local Heineken essentially business. They've got quite a number of local brands which they've been working on, like Tafel,
yes.
Which is the popular Namibian brand.
Yeah,
I agree. And quite recently, they've had a tie-up with Diageo and Heineken, which they're now in the process of actually cleaning up. So Namibian Breweries, at the end of it all, when the dust settles, Namibian Breweries will own roughly 60% or almost 60% of a distribution business that actually sells their product across South Africa. They will own 25% of Sedibeng Brewery, which is based here in South Africa, producing Heineken. Right. So it gives them a bit more volume that they can access and sell, and they also get some reasonable cash flows from the distribution business, allowing them to sell to a market larger than Namibia itself.
Wow, sounds quite impressive. If we can jump back a little bit to FNB, you noticed that, or you mentioned the mortgage book is quite impressive. Is that really taking advantage of this rampant property market that's been brewing in Namibia? Yeah,
so over the last 10 years, property prices have, in most places, pretty much doubled. In Namibia, but all the action is actually taking place, or a lot of the action is taking place in Windhoek, the capital, and people are trying to access properties there. Now, the biggest problem is median house prices have risen quite significantly. I think now you're looking at about 61,000 US dollars for the median house price.
Wow.
Now, if you put that against the average urban earning of about $1,800 a month, US dollars, per annum, sorry. That just kind of gives you an idea of how unaffordable some of these properties are becoming. Right. But I think one of the things that FNB has been able to do is they got into that market relatively early. Right. So they managed to bank a lot of the people who are going for primary residences. They try and limit the number of people they lend to who are going for second, third or fourth mortgages to sort of protect the risk in the book, and they have been able to actually collect quite reasonably well on all the loans that they've actually put out there, which I think has worked for them.
Is there a fear for, I guess this is my pessimist hat coming through, for a potential property bubble here?
Well, I think anytime a country
anything
gets
doubles,
to exactly. Anytime anything doubles, or anytime you get the notoriety of being the most expensive or the fastest rising, then it kind of rings alarm bells. So it'll be quite interesting to sort of see what happens next with Namibian property. But having said that, I think people have been calling it a bubble since about 2009.
Right. As people do with bubbles.
Not to say that it isn't, but I'm just saying it might take a while for that kind of outcome to manifest.
Sure. Okay. You were touching on the breweries. Distribution allows them to go outside of Namibia. Are we seeing elements of that beginning?
Yes. So across South Africa, Windhoek's products are getting more shelf time, and they're becoming more available. You can find Windhoek lagers and drafts in many more outlets, which is obviously a good thing for Namibian breweries, who are the ones who are producing that particular product. It's very important in their particular situation because obviously the Namibian population itself is particularly small, and you can only sell so much of the product in that small market. So the next logical step would be for them to actually go into other markets elsewhere.
And compete with the giant that is SAB Miller.
Well, I think there's a space in there for the kinds of products that they actually have. These aren't brands that they sort of started 2 or 3 years ago. They've been well established and they've won a lot of global awards in terms of the quality of the product that they actually produce. So I think they can actually punch above their weight in that respect and gain and retain some market share in the South African context.
Right. Those two counters in particular, has the market priced in a lot of this good news, or are there still some opportunities potentially for investors?
I think there's opportunity, but a peculiarity with Namibia is the fact that local institutions are compelled to invest in local assets. Right. And because they've been able to build up large amounts of assets, but not many shares that they can actually buy into, that tends to affect the pricing on quite a number of these businesses.
And surely liquidity as well.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So, you know, the market doesn't trade as much as one would have wanted. And, you know, in as much as good stocks are available on the exchange at reasonable prices, I wouldn't say they're cheap, but they're reasonable.
Right.
It's actually quite hard or fairly difficult to get lay your hands on some script there.
Okay. And the likes of Bidvest Namibia, any of those looking interesting as well?
I think they're good businesses. I like the fact that it's a conglomerate and it touches on quite a number of aspects in the economy, but they've also built up a reasonable cash buffer within the business as well.
Right.
So if they don't do a transaction, one day they might pay that out as a dividend, which is actually quite exciting.
And I'm assuming it's as well run as the parent company.
Pretty much. Pretty much.
Any other interesting ideas in Namibia?
You get the likes of Stimulus, which I think is a well-run private equity business. Oryx Properties, which is also quite good.
Private equity specifically in Namibia?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
But again, the biggest issue always comes back to size and can you actually access some of the ideas. But there are some reasonable businesses available there.
That are doing great things in this economy that's actually doing quite well.
Agreed, yeah.
Okay. And for investors, I guess the key concern is can you actually get a hold of these counters in terms of buying up, or are you going to have to pay up? And can you get out when it's time
you actually need to sell? So illiquidity does come back to be an issue. I think if you look at it from an African context, there are quite a number of markets that continue to pose that problem. But what we always look at as the silver lining is if we go back 3 years or we go back 5 years, liquidity was much worse back then.
Right,
so even though we complain about it at the current point, it's way better than it has been for quite some time, and we hope that improvement continues.
Perfect. Let's leave it there. Thanks to my guest, Fungai Tarirah, Portfolio Manager at Rudiarius Capital Management. That's all from Buy Africa this week. Remember to follow me on Twitter. That's at Modiba_Tshepo, and send us your thoughts about the show. Fungai, you don't have a Twitter handle, right?
Working on it.
Working on it, okay. That's all from us. Remember, on the tweets, use the hashtag Buy Africa. From myself and the team, goodbye.